I am Kelsey Keener. I'm a second generation farmer here at Sequatchie Cove Farm in Tennessee. We are a regenerative operation growing organic vegetables and pasture-raised meats and eggs. And today I'm going to just talk kind of through what does it mean to be regenerative and how does that translate in a practical sense to managing a farm. So regenerative is it's this holistic approach that essentially food production and humans are a part of this complex web of life. And this web includes everything from the minerals and water and air to, the plants and the animals and the wildlife. All of these things have to come together kind of in harmony to work together and help each other out. And that is the system that we're striving for in regenerative farming. An important question is, why does this even matter? And, ultimately, I think this modern westernized philosophy and way of kind of interacting with the world is we humans are here to conquer and take over, and nature is kind of this force that we need to fight against, and nature is just here for us to take and take and take, and it's the extractive mentality of nature. Ultimately, many of our environmental disasters that we face today around the world are a result of that mentality. And so regenerative agriculture isn't just a way to grow food, it's really a way to kind of help realign what it means to be a human and how we interact with the world, and ultimately helping the world be a better place rather than making it worse and worse. To me, that's the reason why we do everything we do, is to make this land that we live on a better place, and our community a better place, and the bigger picture, the whole world a better place. We have come up with 7 principles of regenerative agriculture on our farm. The first is learning from the lessons of the past. The second is protecting clean water. The third is enhancing biodiversity. Fourth is humane practices both with animals and with people. The fifth is capturing carbon out of the atmosphere. The sixth is collaborative communities and more of a shared prosperity. And the seventh is building topsoil and organic matter. So when I talk about learning from the lessons of the past, there's different levels of that. But the first is just acknowledging that indigenous cultures around the world have had this knowledge and have known how to work with nature literally for thousands and thousands of years. So we want to acknowledge and respect that and not pretend that we're just making all this up, on our own. And the other aspect of that is learning from nature, the kind of the history of how have animals and plants and people all interacted together in the past. Water is the source of all life. And so having clean water is just one of the fundamental aspects of the health of our planet. Modern agriculture has been a cause of a lot of polluting the waterways. And so regenerative agriculture, we're always thinking about water and how we can protect our water sources and help clean up the waterways. We feel like it is our responsibility as managers of land and farmers to protect this clean water, and a lot of our practices of how we manage animals and manage plants and the land it all revolves around just kind of protecting this valuable resource. Yeah, so a real life example of what does it mean to protect our clean water? With livestock, you don't want the animals just wading into the creek here and standing and pooping and causing erosion, because that's going to cause all kinds of negative downstream consequences. So what we do on our farm, because we do want our animals to have access to this clean water, is we have wells and we pump the water through pipes, and so we kind of bring the water to the animals where they are, and that enables us to keep the animals moving to all the different parts of the farm and they still have access to water, but they're not causing erosion, and they're not, you know, pooping and peeing in the stream. You know, another just kind of real life thing that's amazing, actually, when our friends did the Roots So Deep research film project, it was incredible to see when they measured water retention from farms like ours doing this type of management. I think it was 4 or 5 times the amount of water is just soaked up into the soil and the roots of the plants as compared to an overgrazed farm or like a crop farm that's been tilled a lot. And so, you know, what that's doing is like all of that water soaking into the soil is, for one, it's staying there, and it's going to be there in drought conditions and things like that to, you know, so the plants keep growing. And two, it's not just running off straight into the rivers, which, you know, is another big problem we're having with climate change and that kind of thing, is that all the flash flooding and, you know, huge weather events we're having. So there's so many different levels to think about water, and how, you know, how managing water on your land is super important. It's another really important kind of principle and aspect of regenerative farming is enhancing biodiversity. And what we're always thinking about on our farm is, you know, we want to produce food for ourselves and our community, but we also want to be feeding nature, essentially. And can we protect and enhance the life below the soil, you know, all the fungi and all the little insects and critters down there, and then above the ground, the wildlife that's all around us. You know, we want to have plenty of habitat for the turkey and the deer and the foxes and the birds, because, you know, ultimately a healthy ecosystem is a diverse ecosystem, and an unhealthy ecosystem is one that's just kind of a monocrop that's been sprayed and killed off all life except for one crop. Yeah, so biodiversity is super important. Also, it just kind of makes for a good quality of life. Like, we enjoy bird watching, and you know, we enjoy going out in the pastures and seeing the deer grazing and the turkeys with their, you know, their baby chicks running through the field. And it just, you know, there's something like when you see biodiversity, you just know that you're doing the right thing. It just feels good. And that, you know, that is another really cool aspect of the Roots So Deep film was, you know, was the study of birds and insects. And it's just incredible the amount of biodiversity that's happening out in, you know, out in the pastures and on the edges of the pastures, and just hundreds of different types of birds and thousands of types of insects. You know, all of these things are serving a purpose in the greater ecosystem. And when you lose that biodiversity, each insect and each animal is like, it's a chain, this interconnected web. And when you lose a piece of that, you know, the system essentially is broken. So that's what we're working on, is rebuilding this complex web of life here on the farm. Another really important aspect of regenerative agriculture that you know shouldn't be overlooked is the humane treatment of animals and of people as well. And so with animals, you know, there's just some obvious things like the factory farming systems, you know, these huge industrial farms with animals crammed indoors. It's just not humane. It's really actually kind of a horrific environment. And so we always want to be providing our animals with the best life possible, and with an environment in which they can kind of, you know, have their true natural tendencies. So like pigs, they like to be out rooting and foraging and looking for grasses and nuts and roots and things like that. So, you know, we're raising pigs out in the woods and in pasture settings like this, and all of our animals, you know, raising outdoors with kind of the healthiest lifestyle possible. And really with the, you know, the people aspect is really important as well. So it's like, we don't want to create systems of growing food that relies on the exploitation of people that have a miserable life, essentially, So once again, working in these factory environments and these huge cropping systems, it's just not a pleasant place to work, and in fact, it's often dangerous. So we want to provide, a safe and enjoyable place for our own families and our employees, and ultimately, produce healthy food for our communities as well. So capturing carbon is a really important part of the regenerative movement, kind of on a global scale. We didn't get into farming because we want to capture carbon. All the things that we're doing, it turns out, are actually capturing huge amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere, which is, providing, this really great ecosystem service for the planet. Essentially all we're doing is, as we grow crops and we grow pastures for our animals and we rotate and we let the land rest for long periods of time, essentially all we're doing is letting plants do what they do best, which is they're taking carbon out of the atmosphere in this, this system called photosynthesis, and they're sinking it down into the soil through their roots. And so just letting this grass grow and not grazing it over and over again, but letting it rest and grow, is allowing the carbon to come out of the atmosphere and sink deep down into the soil, which is a great place for it to be, and it's feeding all the other life under the soil. Capturing carbon has gotten a lot of screen time on the news and that kind of thing, and it's a really important aspect of what we're doing on a global scale, but it's not the main focus of what we're doing, but it's just a really great kind of outcome of the whole regenerative system. Building up topsoil and increasing the organic matter in our soil, honestly, it's one of the really important aspects of regenerative agriculture. And the nice thing is it's something you can actually measure. You can take a soil sample and see what your organic matter is. And then over time, your goal is to just continue to be building that organic matter in your soil. So what we're doing right here is we're using multi-species of animals, the sheep and chickens, and we're using that in an intercropping system with growing cover crops, and we're building the fertility and the organic matter with the animals and the cover crops, and then we're able to grow other crops. Like this year we're going to grow corn in this field, and so this is a system that we're actually giving back to the soil, and then we're getting, the soil is giving us crops and producing animal products and things like that. And so it's a symbiotic relationship where we're feeding the soil and the soil's feeding us. For me, another important aspect of regenerative agriculture, I am super passionate about the idea that we need to create more collaborative relationships within our own communities and even across the globe. And I do think that is what brings a lot of power to the regenerative movement, is that sense that it is actually this bigger movement that is, around the globe, and it's actually making a real impact on the planet. In real terms for us, like, we're just constantly trying to create more and more networks within our community and work, supporting other producers in whatever ways we can. And so, for example, like Sequatchie Cove Creamery, they're making the cheeses like the Walden. That was something that kind of sprouted up from our farm and now is its own business. And, we grow corn, but we don't have our own grain mill. So we work with a local miller who specializes in stone milling corn. And so, we grow the corn and then he mills it into the cornmeal and grits and things like that. And we also work with other local beekeepers that produce honey. These are just examples, and there could be a million different ways to collaborate. But, these are examples of how, like, we're all supporting each other by producing different products and selling each other's products and promoting each other and that kind of thing. And I think it's really important, and on many different levels, one just being that, like, it's really hard to make a profit farming. And so making a profit is another important aspect of a truly sustainable regenerative system. In today's modern world, like, if we don't have a successful business, we can't keep doing all the other great things that we were talking about earlier. And in order to have a successful business, working together and supporting each other is the best way to achieve that. The broader perspective is thinking about the age-old dilemma of, like, the ultra wealthy having all the power and control. And, I think doing highly replicable models of kind of shared ownership and supporting each other is a really amazing way to kind of break that system and rely less and less on these huge industrial corporations that are essentially owned and controlled by the ultra wealthy. So all the way from kind of a personal level and a community level up into, like, more of a kind of political and global level, I think collaborative systems and working together in cooperative models is a super important aspect of this regenerative movement really taking root and growing into something, something real with real impact.